A cultura é um dos mais preciosos instrumentos de democracia. É um canal de expressão plural que permite a convivência de diferentes vozes, histórias e visões de mundo. E por isso a cultura, tal qual a democracia, deve ser defendida e fortalecida. Essa é a função da Lei Rouanet, a principal política pública de incentivo à cultura brasileira. Com ela, perseguimos a missão de assegurar o acesso democrático à produção e à difusão cultural. Ao longo de mais de 3 décadas, a Rouanet permitiu que inúmeras iniciativas culturais, antes inviáveis, ganhassem o mundo. Revelou histórias, preservou tradições e transformou vidas. Lei Rouanet, há 33 anos, tornando a cultura brasileira mais plural, acessível e democrática.
Casal de dançarinos se olham sorridentes. Uma banda orquestrada para de tocar. Logos: Lei Rouanet, Ministério da Cultura, Governo Federal, Brasil, União e Reconstrução.
Onde tem cultura, a Vale está. No poder criativo que nasce dos palcos, orquestras, das artes, das ruas e dos museus. Na valorização das diversas identidades brasileiras e na preservação de memórias. É valorizando a cultura que crescemos e evoluímos juntos. Instituto Cultural Vale.
O brasileiro não sabe ser pequeno. É da nossa natureza mover a vida como gigantes. Por isso a CCR, maior empresa de infraestrutura e mobilidade do Brasil, está movendo a sua marca para um novo momento. A CCR agora é Motiva. Mais do que estradas, trilhos e aeroportos movendo o Brasil. Uma marca que já nasce gigante como você. Motiva. Você nos move.
Eu, para o meu filho, para criança, para todo mundo, como é que faz remédio domado para criança, para bebê, né? A gente tira a raiz, a folha, para cozinhar, para tomar. Remédio para febre e dor de cabeça também.
E às vezes a gente não consegue alcançar, né, o conhecimento. E eu sempre procurei entender com os pajés, né, com os mais velhos, e eu sempre estava ali presente em cada ritual que eles faziam. E hoje eu tenho um pouco desse conhecimento. É claro que tem muita coisa que eu devo aprender ainda, né, mas eu sempre repasso esse conhecimento para o jovem, até porque a minha preocupação maior é de fazer com que os jovens sempre mantenham, né, o nosso conhecimento, a nossa cultura, a nossa tradição. Esse é o foco principal da minha luta, né?
Porque aqui, né, toda criança fala só guarani, né? E adulto também, porque não está acostumado a falar só português, não fala não. É por isso que a criança, adulto também não esquece de falar.
Eu, como mulher, como mãe, avó, essa é a minha luta.
Ministério da Cultura e a Associação Casa Azul apresentam 23ª FLIP, Festa Literária Internacional de Paraty. A Flip conta com o benefício da Lei Federal de Incentivo à Cultura, Lei Rouanet, PRONAC 235060, e possui acessibilidade para pessoas com deficiências física, visual e auditiva. Tem patrocínio Jequitibá do Nubank. Patrocínio Figueira da Vale. Patrocínio Guapuruvu do Itaú e da Motiva, por meio do seu instituto. Patrocínio Cedro do Sesc, da MAC Móveis e de O Globo. Patrocínio Araribá, da Globo Livros. Apoio institucional da Prefeitura de Paraty, Governo do Estado do Rio de Janeiro, IFAM, Instituto do Patrimônio Histórico e Artístico Nacional e Museu do Território. É uma criação e realização Associação Casa Azul e Ministério da Cultura, Governo Federal, Brasil, União e Reconstrução. Flip, o encontro da literatura com a cidade.
Because we were dancing with Rosa to this song in the backstage, but I would like to begin by thanking the Spanish Embassy in Brazil and the Cervantes Institute in Rio, which sponsored her trip, because we're reaching the end of Saturday. Flip is almost over, so it touches our heartstrings, but it's incredible how the roundtables happen and Flip was designed, and we can see what happened here. What was the design of the festival? And I think in the opening roundtable I talked about whims and relaxation and work with seriousness, but at the same time fun, good humor, and this enchantment that we have for literature. I think this happened every other roundtable. We made this work, right? And Rosa's roundtable combines both, because Rosa is a whimsical relaxation to chair. I want to call Paulo Roberto Pires, who's one of the few people, I always do this. If there's anybody else, tell me. One of the few people who came to every session in Flip. Paulo is a journalist, editor of Cervantes magazine, and this professional Flip person. Good evening. Okay. Without further ado, Rosa Montero, please come out onto the stage. Hello. Amazing. Awesome. Okay. You guys live in my heart, right? First of all, I would like to say that you're amazing, that you're the most affectionate people in the world. And in these days, they give me many hugs every day, many hugs, and hugs that are cure and heal, right? So thank you for that. Okay, yes. Okay, that's good. That's yours, right? Let me get my own headset, okay, to be able to understand, right? Okay. Good evening, good evening, good evening. Good evening. Hello. Good evening, one and all, here in the tent, in the Town Square Auditorium. It's packed. I want to thank Flip for the invitation, especially Rosa Montero for sharing with us in this session with the tickets sold out in half an hour, right? Before we begin, I want to remind you that you can send questions in writing. After the roundtable, Rosa will be autographing her books, right? Okay, this is not exactly a meeting with Rosa. It's a re-encounter in 2004 in the second Flip, which had Paul Auster, Chico Buarque, Margaret Atwood, Martin Amis. One of the main highlights was a Spanish writer, a certain Spanish writer who was launching a strange work, kind of fiction, kind of an essay. After the round table where she talked next to Adriana Lisboa and Isabel Fonseca, all of her books sold out immediately. The Crazed Woman Inside Me and Rosa Montero was identified unanimously as the great surprise in that festival. A surprise for us Brazilians, right? Because she had published her first novel, fiction novel, in 1979, and she was already consecrated in Spain, in some countries where it was translated into other languages. In the 21 years separating that year, that evening, a Friday evening, this Saturday, the world has changed. We have changed, and Rose is no longer an author that Brazil is discovering. She's an author that Brazil loves. I'm not overstating that, but the West way of declaring this love to her are the more than 100,000 copies of her books that are circulating in Brazil. And this alone, with the editions by Todavia, who began to publish her work in 2009. I'm sorry to be too intimate, but if I introduce here, it's because she establishes in her books an extraordinary proximity with readers, right? Especially in 3 of these books. The one that she calls artifacts, literary artifacts, and that will be at the center of our conversation this afternoon. They are in the order that they were launched in Spain. The Crazed Woman Inside Me from 2003, here translated by Paloma Vidal. The Ridiculous Idea of Never Seeing You Again in 2013. And The Danger of Being Sane, translated by Mariana Sanchez. And she was recently We Women, Great Feminine Lives in 2008, which is an anthology of biographies translated by Josélie Viana Batista. And Good Luck from 2020, with a translation by Fabio Weintraub. Next year, the publishing house is promising another novel, which I love. It's called The Flesh. So understand you. Rosa Montero was born in 1951 in Madrid. She studied psychology. She went to a newsroom to work. What kind of newsroom? Because since 77, to this day, she collaborates with El País, a mainstream newspaper in Spain, at the beginning of a process of re-democratization of Spain and the death of General Franco, who was in power for 36 years. For a long time, Rosa divided between the daily work and newsroom and literature, and to this day she has a weekly column in El País, the oldest collaborator of this newspaper, El País. Thus far, she's published almost 40 different books, 20 of which, okay, I'm the oldest one, at least, the most productive one, right? Not just the oldest one. Okay, thus far, 40 books, thus far, right? Okay, 20 of which she considers novels and the artifacts and several genres in prose. Her most recent book, launched in January this year, 2025, is Difficult Beasts, the last science fiction novel, the Bruna Husky, the detective Bruna Husky, The Ridiculous Idea of Being Sane or Lucid, doesn't have anything to do with the books that she discusses. To talk about literature, for Rosas, to talk about imagination, without which you cannot write. To talk about imagination is to talk about a break with the patterns of normality and living other stories, other lives. And imagination, she recalls, is at the limits of madness. For it was the crazed woman of the house, but it's just one of the possible ways of being uncontrolled voluntarily, losing control. In other words, another one is a form that she values love, and I make a citation. I've always found a perfect parallelism between writing and torrid love stories. Both of these experiences require an absolute delivery, an imaginary delivery, but she also writes in another place. To write novels was what I found most similar to falling in love, the advantage that the writing doesn't need collaboration from another person, right? Okay. Once and for all, sanity is a ridiculous idea, right? But nothing of this is clear. It is exclusive to literature. At the end of the day, fables, passion, fate, or insecurity, love, and death are experiences that all have in common. Your experiences are shared experiences. Let's say that people who write live these emotions with everybody, but not everybody who lives these emotions turns them into literature, right? This is essential. Okay, from there, the extraordinary proximity with readers that Rosa establishes, I'm referring at the beginning here, I cite again. It's the word that makes us human, she writes, Rosa Montero, and based on the word and the combination, infinite combination of words that we're going to talk about here tonight. So let's get started, okay? Writing begins with a moment, a fleeting moment with shining a perception, an insight, and I'm going to quote here again, initial insight. It's mobilizing and striking, what you called the wine is the beginning of everything. Wine is it's based on the things get arranged and go into the funnel, that everything looks to funneled into the book, okay? But it's curious that you said it's a process, a lonely process, but a solitary process, but ever since the instant that you conceive the book, the reader is there already. The reader is right there. I would like for you to talk about these impulses, right, that are so defined, that moment where you perceive and realize that there's a story there, that it's going to exist and it needs to be told to someone. Okay, that's the beginning, right? Please, take it away. Yes, of course, totally. Okay, great. The question is that novelists, we are people in general who have not finished, and we're not mature yet. We haven't grown up. We cerebrally immature. This is literal. The human brain takes a long time to mature, up to 30 years. It's not mature yet. When I realized that it took that long, I understood a lot of things, of course. Right, that it took so long to mature the brain. And in this long trajectory until neurological maturity, there's a very important moment which happens in the first puberty, the initial puberty, which thus far the kids and the girls and boys have their brain that's hyper-connected. All of the neurons are connected to each other. And the head is like electric torment and a chemical soup. That's why the boys, when a dog goes by, they think it's a dragon. They have unfettered imagination. In the first puberty, there's this step of maturation, which is extremely important, which consists of a spurt where they prune the neurological connections, the useless ones in the brain, in order to concentrate the brain on what is useful, which is great for survival of the species. In other words, to concentrate the brain on hunting mammoths, to gather without eating poison, and you can, be capable of raising offspring and keep them alive until they grow and can have offspring as well. This is phenomenal for the species to last and prosper. But there are 20%, or I don't know exactly the number, but I've calculated through other things that it's probably about 20%, which is what we call, of the humans, 20% of them that leap this phase. They leapfrog the pruning. And if you prune you don't prune anything or you prune it improperly, and they continue to have the brain hyper-connected. According to neurophysiologists, amongst these 20% are people with mental disorders, and we, the creators, are also included in these 20%. The artists, we either are good or bad. It doesn't have to do with the quality. It has to do with your crazed head, okay, that we have. And my theory is that also you are, many of you all in the audience are included in those 20% because I believe that people who need to read, to live, to be able to withstand life, all these people who love reading and they need it furiously, which I believe that many of you people in the audience are part of that 20%, are also people who don't have the brain pruned properly, with the synapses pruned properly. So we are all part of what Proust called the magnificent and unfortunate family of the nervous people, or the neurotics. My brain goes by itself. I'm always imagining things. It works by itself. Everything that comes out of nowhere, which I can't control, and which are absurd, and which don't go anywhere. They don't serve any purpose. They cross my head like a comet, and they go away. For example, I could be in the face of a elevator, and before they open the doors, I can see, because they're visions, right, in front of an elevator. Paulo said this. I can see when they open the doors to the elevator, you can see a body, a cadaver, curled up in a sack full of blood, in a pool of blood. If you open the doors to the elevator, this imagine goes away. It doesn't serve any purpose at all. There was no corpse there. But one day, in this tumult of images in my head, one fine day, there appears an image. I don't know why, because these images are born from our inconscious, from the same place where the dreams are born. They're like dreams that you dream with your eyes open, right? It's like daydreaming. So one of these images appears that I don't know why. It disturbs me, it moves me, it fills me with excitement and wonder and fear, curiosity, of need to know more about that image. I'm so full of images that they don't fit in my chest or in my head. So I say, that's what I need to tell. This is what I have to share. I have to share that. And that's where the novel comes from. And as Paulo said, it's precious because it's priceless, because writing is a tremendously solitary task. In addition, while you're writing, you don't think of the reader because you're so intimate. It's like dreaming a dream, and to live inside this dream, it's so intimate, and that you write for the reader that you have inside yourself. You write the book that you would like to read, or you try to read it, try to write it, at least as is said, when this, I call this, it's this image, the first image that's so disturbing and mobilizing. There appear the readers, okay? There appears the need to tell it. There appears the need to communicate this idea, because art is essentially communication, right? That is why.
And that is why I think that we have a great example. Give me a minute.
Sim, dale.
Para que a gente veja isso melhor.
So in order to see this, there's a fantastic example that moved me when I read the book, and Rosa will read an excerpt of this book, The Mad Woman of the House. I will read it in Spanish. Give me a minute. Yes, we have interpretation. Okay, I know how it works. The Mad Woman of the House. Let me find this excerpt. One of the most beautiful experiences I've ever lived took place on the west coast of Canada, near Victoria. It was at the beginning of the month of September, more than 10 years ago. Two Germans, Pablo and myself, got on a small Zodiac with capacity for 6 people and went out to the Pacific to watch whales. It is a touristic activity that has become famous in these waters, and it seems that lately the sea is so crowded with people that cetaceans hardly come to the coast. At that time, however, we were totally alone. We sailed for a while until we stopped around some islands, And then the owner turned off the engine, and we stood still, rocked like babies by a calm sea. It was a warm and bright morning. The islets shone green on the horizon, and the green silence rested on our shoulders like a veil, magnified by the licking of the water against the zodiac or the passing screech of a seagull. We were like this, without moving, without saying a word, for 15 endless minutes. And then, suddenly, without any warning, it happened. A terrifying boom stirred the sea beside us. It was a jet of water, the jet of a whale, powerful, huge, foaming water spout that soaked us wet and made the Pacific boil around us. And the noise, that incredible sound, this primordial roar, an oceanic breath, the breath of the world. That was the first feeling, deafening, blinding. And immediately after that, the whale emerged. It was a humpback, one of the largest, and it began to surface next to us, barely 2 meters from the gunwale, because cetaceans are curious beings and want to check out strangers. So, first emerged the nose and immediately dipped it back. And then everything else slided by in an immense wave, a colossal arc of flesh in the surface, flesh and more flesh, bright, dark, rubbery, and at the same time dark. And at a given moment, the eye passed by, a round and intelligent eye that stared at us, an intense gaze from the abyss. And after that touching gaze, there was a lot of whale, a muscular wall bristling with crustaceans and beard algae. And at last, when we were breathless at the enormity of the animal, it raised its gigantic tail and plunged it again slowly. And all of this displacement,
Ni la más pequeña ola.
this tremendous body did not raise the slightest wave, did not produce the slightest splash, did not make the noise, but the noise of a soft hiss of this flesh caressing the water, and then disappeared as if it had never been. The Peruvian Julio Ramon Ribeiro says that sometimes a writer has the feeling. Give me a minute here. To the side? Well, the writer has the feeling that he has lost his best work. Reading Cervantes recently, and I quote Ribeiro, reading Cervantes recently, a breath passed through me and I did not have time to grasp it. Why? Well, somebody interrupted me, the phone rang, I don't know, unfortunately, because I remember that I felt compelled to start something. Then it vanished away. We all keep a book, perhaps a great book, but that in the turmoil of our internal life rarely emerges or does so quickly that we don't have time to harpoon it. This is the quote by Ribeiro. I like this phrase because I always thought that, yes, in fact, the vision of a work has a lot to do with a choppy, hypnotizing, and almost annihilating vision, as was the Pacific whale in the Pacific. With writing, it's just the same. You often sense that on the other side of the tip of your fingers lies the secret of the universe, a waterfall of perfect well, the essential work that gives it meaning. You are on the brink of creation, and in your head, you have admirable plots, fantastic novel, grandiose whales that only show you the lightning of their wet back, or rather, fragments of that back, fragments of that whale, hints of beauty that let you feel the unbearable beauty of the entire animal. But then, before you have time to do anything, before you even have time to calculate its volume and shape, before you have time to understand the meaning of its piercing gaze, this prodigious beast is submerged and the world is still and deep deaf and so empty. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Well, I think that that excerpt, so beautiful, has to do with everything that you write. I mean, the research that you performed for the danger of being lucid, you provide a lot of objective pieces of information. Artists, writers more than musicians, like visual artists that have a trend towards being maybe unbalanced. An American artist quote say that writers have four more times to suffer bipolar disorder and three times more than being depressive than other creators. And it's interesting because you say this and you say when you began writing, writing fiction or more fiction than journalism, you didn't have any more panic attacks. You discover a stability in fiction writing. I mean, how did you come about this awareness that, I mean, journalism is a writing that has more difficulties in being part of reality, but literature puts you in a place where you feel that you feel better. How did you discover that literature saved you? Saved me? Well, fiction writing. Well, because journalism, written journalism is also literature. It's a genre. Yes, fiction. Well, you have talked about many interesting things here. The first thing that I would like to say, and what you say about fiction writing, is that, well, I've always written. I've written since I was a little girl. Most novel writers started writing as kids. My first short story, my mom kept it. I wrote it when I was 5, and it was a horrible short story of mouses that spoke, as of course we can imagine. Ever since I've been a human being, because we remember ourselves from the age of around 5, I remember myself writing fiction. It was like a game for me. But at that age, the most important thing in our lives are games. It was a essential part of what I am. It was the as an exogenous skeleton that kept me upright. And journalism came later when I thought that I had to look for a job, make a living, because writing novels, of course, I thought that I wouldn't be able to make a living being a novel writer. And I would say that that was a fantastic choice. And I imagine that there maybe are writers that want to become writers, published writers. An essential thing is not to live from creative literature, because in creative writing you have to be free. You have to have another job, make a living with something else. So I started publishing before as a journalist, of course. When I was 18, I published and worked. Well, and at that time, I had panic attacks when I was 16. From 16 to my 30 years, I had panic attacks. They are cousins of anxiety crisis. They're a little more crazy than anxiety attacks, but they're similar. And I'm sure that here in this audience, we have a lot of people that have had both panic attacks and anxiety attacks. Well, at that time, and in my social class, which was poor and ages ago because I'm an older woman now, well, they wouldn't take you to a shrink, a psychiatrist. So when I had my first panic attack, and I thought I was going crazy. I didn't know what was going on. I decided to study psychology to know what was happening with me. And that's the reason why I think 98% of psychologists study psychologists, because they think they're nuts, which it's not bad at all, because it gives you empathy with your own patients. And I'm not being critical about this. And I didn't graduate. When I arrived at the 4th year, I knew what was going on with me, and I dropped out. So that was it. Well, so I still had my panic attacks and everything. And when I turned 30, I haven't had any more panic attacks. Why? I wonder why. Well, let's see. When I turned 30. Interestingly enough, it's not that I started writing fiction, which I wrote since I was a little girl. That's why I told you I wrote fiction since I was a little girl. I started publishing fiction. What those of you that have had a panic attack, you will understand what it is to be crazy. It is a disruption of ordinary narrative. You leave the ordinary narrative. You leave the species. What we badly call madness. It's a loneliness. It's a feeling of loneliness that it is not understandable if you haven't been there. You cannot explain it. It is a loneliness that goes beyond loneliness when you're confronted with death, because death, it's the most common thing. We all die. All human beings die. But nevertheless, to be crazy or have mental disorders disguises itself and makes you believe that when you have a mental disorder, only happens with you, nobody else had it, nobody else will have it, and it's lonely. It's as if a giant person would kick your head and robbed you of your life, of your skin, of the human species, and you become an ET, the only ET you know. And who are you going to tell what's going on with you if nobody speaks this language? You don't understand what's going on with you. That's why mental disorders are horrible. You cannot express them. So we are social animals. And that feeling of loneliness, horrible, horrible, unsayable, that can't be expressed because this type of loneliness does not fit in the world, in the word loneliness. It's the greatest psychic pain, acute psychic pain. You feel alone outside of the world and your species. So what happens? I stopped having panic attacks. I could have them. I can have them at any moment. I believe I stopped having them because I started not being afraid of fear. We have to really learn how to carry our luggage of darkness. We have to learn to live with our bag of darkness. If I have a panic attack, I know how to deal with it. I know that if it's as you have an attack of anxiety, I won't have this attack forever. It's not as a cosmonaut that lost the breathing line to your spaceship and you will drift away in the black space as if as you feel when you have a mental disorder. Why? Because now I'm not afraid of being afraid, but it's a coincidence. It's a coincidence that I never had any more panic attacks when I published my books on a regular basis. What happens? Fiction writing, there are psychiatrists that say that a novel, it's a controlled delirium. And in fact, fiction writing makes you live other lives, delirious lives, but you know it's your imagination. You don't mistake it for reality. Jorge Petol, the Mexican writer, says that a novelist is a person that hears voices. And this makes a writer similar to a crazy person. We hear voices. It's controlled delirium. And a novel is where you write about your inner self, the internal lava that you have in your heart, your scares, your fears, your innermost that has no words. You put it outside. And then if people start going by and they say this, that you feel and say, I have it, I feel it, I understand you, I feel it too. This helps you understand the world as if a hand would reach out and get the astronaut that is drifting away, brought it back to the earth and sew it back. And this makes you become sane. Because what is madness? It is the rupture of the collective. And this puts you back in the collective. So the winning ticket, because I published journalism since I was 18, but that was useless because journalism is a social writing. You're not talking about your internal delusions. And I wrote fiction since I was 5, but I never published. and it doesn't work. The winning ticket is to write fiction, publish fiction, and have readers. Have readers. That's the winning ticket. That is what lands you in the world again to write. I think that most writers feel that if we hadn't written, we would go mad or we would become detached from the world.
Okay. One of the forms of this experience, which is recurrent in the books, a presence of another Rosa in one of the books, or somebody who is impersonating Rosa. There's Martina, your twin sister in The Crazed Woman, who may exist or not, because it doesn't make any difference, because she exists in the book, so she exists. And the danger of becoming insane, Barbara, who impersonates Rosa Montero. And allow me to quote the book, which has not been translated yet, The Flesh, where it's not a twin, but it's Soledad, the main character, meeting Rosa Montero in the book. And she has Soledad describing you. I ask Mariana Sanchez, I'm going to quote the informal translation. Rosa Montero arrives and with her character, and she says, what kind of a disordered woman. Soledad analyzed her with cruel eyes. She used Dr. Martin boots with embroidered roses, and her clothing was terrible. Clothing from one of those hippies with Indian clothes, secondhand. My God, she thinks she's looking younger, but Rosa and her are about the same age. It was not very young, although she wanted to dress as if she were young. Warm Rosa manga rolled up her sleeves and showed a bunch of birds tattooed on one of her arms and a salamander on the other arm, and she is tattooed to top it all. Soledad had to keep from laughing, and this woman dares to write novels. That's so absurd, right? I would like for you to talk about this literary recourse of another person, like a twin, an imposter, and being yourself, right? You appear in the book. How can a woman that you invented, how do they view you, that other woman that you've invented? That sounds pretty difficult, right? Okay, the first thing is that the characters have their own lives, of course. I swear. The truth is that a mature writer has the humility to let this story be told by the characters, and you live in these characters. You have to live in all the characters, all from the lead characters to the last character. And when I saw classes of creative writers, I always say that after writing a scene where various different characters participate, normally when I write a novel, sometimes I see the writing with the relief that the character in the story. But when I write, after writing a scene or a chapter with various characters, you have to go back to think of this scene in this chapter from the head of each of the characters, the ones that participate. But more than once, a character, a secondary character, have said, I'm not going to play that role. I want to be the main, I want to have the main role. If I don't get the main role, normally the characters have their own lives. Others in The Flesh, Soledad is an art agent, very sophisticated. She's a misogynist woman, right? A misogynist woman. I detest misogynist women, but Soledad loves her because she has a lot of problems. She's had a very difficult life, right? The protagonist in Flesh. Of course, she was extremely elegant, dressed to the T, with little rope. She had a small closet, but it's wonderful, exquisite, and wonderful and beautiful. And she meets Rosa Montero because she has to have had some, and of course, there had to be some data. I hate her immediately. I hate myself because Soledad wants to write a novel and she can't. So he hates that I write novels, Rosa Montero. So she hates me. Why does she do these things? Okay, the issue is that I don't believe in reality. I believe that reality is something very It's not very trustworthy. It's one of my ways of relating to the world, not believing in the reality. Reality is not reliable or trustworthy. How can reality be trustworthy? Until 16 years in the evening in my parents' home, of course, arranging the table and fixing the table and the kitchen. I say, okay. And I left to the other side of a black tunnel. It's actually a tunnel with the first panic attack. You go into a black tunnel. If reality is like that, how can I believe in reality? Understand? It's not very trustworthy or reliable. In fact, in addition, when 20 years go by, let's say something that I remember, right? Sometimes I don't know what I remember. I've lived it, I've read it, I've dreamed it, I've written it, or people have told it to me. And all of these possibilities have the same feeling of beauty. And this should be part also of this cables, this weird wiring that we have of the non-pruned people, because my mother, my mother, for example, oftentimes who was an artist. She was a repressed artist, but she would have been wonderful. Oftentimes, I told her things that had happened to me, and 6 months later, she told me the same story as if it had happened with her. And I live devils, and she understands me very well. So these kinds of games I do to show and demonstrate exactly that these borders in reality are totally fuzzy, floating, and slippery. Okay, we live immediately in mirrorism at the center of each eye. In the center of each eye, there's a point, a dark well, where the optic nerve touches the retina, and you can't see it. It's a blind spot. There's a small dot, like it's not that small. It's a blind spot that measures to 2 to 4 degrees of the visual arc, and the full moon occupies a half degrees. 2 dots, 2 blind spots on your retina. On the one hand, you look one way and look at the other, and you don't see any black holes, because a blind person is the one who can't see. We live in a kind of mirrorism. So all of these games of double meanings that I leave, but I am and I'm not at the same time, and realities, parallel realities are part of this attempt to write in the world, right? Which I can tell you as I see it. And of course, you began by saying that in fact, first, people we dedicate creative things to, we have greater tendency statistically to suffer mental disorders, a little greater statistical trend of all of those who dedicate to creative things, the ones, as you said, especially the writers, the ones that are most prone to mental disorders. That's not serious because you're a minority. Of course, you're a minority, right? It's not that serious, okay, amongst writers, but I can repeat, they're a minority. And I detest, and I don't laugh if you take this idea here, I hate this way to say, okay, a writer, to be a writer, you have to suffer a lot. Okay, I hate that. It's a lie, right? You don't have to suffer at all. The less we suffer, the better for everybody, right? But it's true. But I hate especially this of saying, oh, you have to suffer to be a writer. This image of writers are tormented by reality, because I insist that they're a minority, and there are other professions as well who also have high percentages than the average, for example, in suicides, nevertheless, they don't appear tormented. What profession has the highest percentage, much higher percentage of suicides than the average? The dentists, right? I'm serious, right? We don't say, to be a dentist, you have to suffer. We don't say that. Why do you have to suffer to be a writer? Okay, so I completely refuse this false idea or the insight of suffering to become a creative writer. Okay. Okay, great. Okay, I'd like for you to talk in some points reality. At some moments, this narrative of reality is imposed. It's a very serious moment. It's a moment of death, right? The confrontation with death, facing death. You write, and I'm quoting here, we novelists write, we shoot with incessantly words against death, like archers in a castle in ruins, right? Like an archer in a castle in ruins. This was in 2003 in The Crazed Woman Inside Me. In 2009, you lost your partner of 22 years, Pablo. I'm saying intimately because of the quote here. And 4 years later, in 2013, you published this book, which is The Ridiculous Idea of Never Seeing You Again. It's a title that for me and for a lot of people, it's one of the best, if not the best, definition of what death is. It's a ridiculous idea of never seeing you again. The idea of writing this book, did it come to you immediately, since there's a tradition, right, of grief and mourning in literature? And I would like you to talk about how you reached this title, because the title is ironic, somewhat ironic. I would like you to tell about this decision, because it's a very serious decision, I think, right? Yes, great. Again, Paulo, you've raised a number of important topics. First of all, I am especially obsessed with death as a writer. All of my books are crisscrossed. The main theme of my novels is death, in the sense of meaning of life. If there is some meaning in this whole of death, time makes us, and it undoes it, because you live and you're undone in time. Journalists ask me why I talk so much about death, and I laugh, because I say, can you talk about anything else? But that's true. Okay, so I'll go back to this. The issue about death. Actually, we write against death. I at least write against death. Pablo, curiously, my partner, when he died, I don't have a relationship with writing, a direct relationship with autobiography. I'm incapable of writing a novel stuck to my life. It doesn't come out. I need to. It's my way of writing. There are writers, great writers, wonderful writers that do this, like, for example, Proust. Proust, he said he created this, with the heart of darkness. It's the report of his travel to Kipling. It's not a criticism. I'm talking a way of approaching literature. I cannot do that. Like Rudyard Kipling, autobiography, and do something. I have to take a step back and put characters in the middle that have nothing to do with me. A taxi driver who is 40 years old, who his wife died before Pablo died, of course. I don't know, an android from the 22nd century. Okay, when Pablo died, my friends who loved him, then they know me, and they told me, why don't I write a book about mourning? And I said that I could not write a book about grief, because I'm not capable of writing about the warmth of my life. I need to take a step back and put things in the middle, right? And so this is like the wonderful verses by Pessoa, Fernando Pessoa. Pessoa said, a poet is not totally, he can't feel the pain of the pain which he actually feels. So he can't express the pain that you feel the death, the pain, but to make the pain yourself, you need to pass through it and take a step back from the pain. And I need this to make my emotions. I have to take a step back from my emotions. I cannot insist on over time. This does not mean that I don't like some books in grief written on immediately. I recommend one if you haven't read it. Piedad Bondet, a Colombian. She doesn't have a name, which I wrote during the following year. The suicide of her 21-year-old son. It's a great book, a wonderful book.
It's not, I mean, so 2 years later, and after 2 years, my publisher sent Marie Curie's grieving diary. She went out and she was run over by a cart. Next year, she wrote a real diary of mourning, a 24-page diary, which is terrible, terrible. And my publisher wanted me to write the preface of a collection of short stories. And I read that book by Marie Curie and it blew me out. I realized I wanted to talk about something else with Marie Curie about life, about how we can learn how to live a more calm and light life, a full life. But of course, the thing is that to fulfill this serene, full, and calm life, first you have to come to terms with your death and the death of the loved ones. And of course, the ridiculous idea of not seeing you again, which is something that I took from Marie Curie's diary and something we have all heard about, in spite of the fact that it is a book about life, it talks about death. And then I could talk about Pablo's death, because 2 years had gone by. All of you here, if you have suffered the death of a loved one, you know that on average, the first 2 years are the desert. And after 2 years, it's not that you have forgotten it, but you're starting to learn how to live a different life, because you're never the same after somebody that you love has passed. You invent a different life. And after 2 years in the desert, you learn how to live a different life. So after 2 years, I could talk about Pablo's death. I was not talking about my own grief. I was talking about the grief of every person. So going back to death. Okay, yes. In fact, I am writing against death. It's an obsession. Ever since I was a little girl, when I was 9, they would tell, little Rosa, look at the beautiful afternoon. How fantastic. Go out to play, because time will go by and you will be sleeping, and time will go back, and tomorrow you'll be at school, and very soon time will go back and you will be a grown up, and time will go back and your parents will have passed, and time has gone will go by and you will pass away. Don't stare at me pitifully, because I repeat what I said once and again. They told me, little Rosa, take advantage of this afternoon because you will go to sleep tonight. If you're aware of death, you're aware of life. Remember what John Lennon would sing? Life is what happens while you're busy going somewhere else. So that is John Lennon. No, I'm not busy doing something else. I'm busy living. I feel life. I feel that animal joy of being alive and well, and thinking that, well, I think I won't pass away today. So it's a feeling of total vitality. So I don't care. I don't care to pay the price of my panic attacks, which ultimately a panic attack is fear of death, even though when you have an attack, you don't realize. I pay the price of having my panic attacks if I will live very intensely. When I was 20, I would look with a corner of my eyes to elderly people, and I was in horror of them. I looked at them and stared at them, and I thought they were so old. And I would look at them and I'd say, look at these elderly people. They're more than 60, and they're out there dining out, having a paella with such a lovely face. And they go to the movies, and they're talking and laughing, these old persons. If I were their age, I wouldn't do anything. How can they do that if they're so near death? They're near death. If I were their age, I would be weeping or hiding, scared of death. And now I'm way past 60. I'm not screaming in panic out of fear of dying, because I've done good things. And what's the good thing I've done in my life? To write. So I remember when I published 20 years ago a book called The History of the Transparent King, that has no translations. Well, I was in a conference of a Spanish newspaper, and a reader said, "I love your books, but I think that the book I loved best is that after I read your books, I'm less scared to die." And it happened to me. It happened to me. When I finished this book, The Transparent King, I was less afraid to die. So to write serves many purposes. And to read too, mind you. Reading too. To read serves a lot of purposes. Yes. Well, you talked about the story of the transparent king you published 20 years ago, and then another story in the Middle Ages in France that disguises herself as a man to survive. That is, she disguises the fact that she's a woman. I want you to tell us about that because there is a feminine thing. I mean, the place of women, in spite of the fact that you make a separation. Literature shouldn't serve a cause. But tell us, it's a book I know you like and that you worked a lot with this book. How did you come across this book? I mean, it's almost as if it were a metaphor of what it is to be a woman, how women act in society, how they're supposed to act. Well, again, so many topics you talk about. Amazing. Okay, the first thing I want to say is that when you write a novel, it doesn't serve any purpose. You don't pretend to teach anybody anything. It's for you to learn, to shed some light in darkness, to write about your obsessions so that you can learn from them. So I hate it. I hate it when we have books that are useful because they betray the purpose of fiction writing. I hate it when there are feminist novels. Me, myself, as a citizen, I defend animals. I am a feminist and an environmentally friendly person, but I can do my activism and essay writing and journalism, but not in fiction writing, because the sense of writing fiction is the search of existence. It is a knowledge journey, and you cannot embark on this journey with pre-known answers. It is a treason to fiction writing. But the thing is that supposedly you write a novel with what you are, with all of your essence, your ideas, and supposedly, you will express your values. I say supposedly because when you're writing fiction from your unconsciousness, without any type of control, well, sometimes very weird things come out. Tolstoy. Tolstoy was a chauvinist, the great Tolstoy. I love him. I love him. Ivan Tolstoy. He was a horrible chauvinist. Gorky would say that he hated women. More than a chauvinist, he was a misogynist, and he was a backward, an anarchist, but he was a retrograde anarchist. He was against progress. So he wrote Anna Karenina. The idea to write Anna Karenina was to write a novel against progress. Progress, he said, Tolstoy said, ended Russia, an invention of his head that never existed. Great, fantastic Russia. That is why Gorky wrote a novel. Tolstoy wrote this Anna Karenina that she commits suicide jumping into the railroad and she was run over by the train. So, I mean, and that is what he wanted to write about. He wanted to write about adulterous women. But Tolstoy, he was a genius, a bloody genius. And Anna Karenina spoke. And it is a feminist novel. It betrayed him. Anna Karenina spoke against Tolstoy. So sometimes you let your inner self be seen, but sometimes, as with Tolstoy, not always. So when I wrote the novel about the transparent king, I loved it because it was a very ambitious novel, and I'm happy with the result. Well, yes, in the first, it's a very thick novel. In the first third of the novel, Leola is wearing an armor disguised as a man. In the second third, she is dressed as a woman and sometimes as a man. And in the last third, she is dressed up as a woman. Of course, there is a first reading interpretation that is the obvious interpretation, and many of you women here will say I'm right, that we need to be little men to be accepted in a world that is still not neutral, that is still marked by male decisions. But it's not only that. Actually, and especially, one of the topics in my books that I love is to talk about identity. And this novel, above all, it is a novel about how difficult it is to find your place in the world, how difficult it is to know who you are. And this is the same for men and women, I would say. So this search of who she is till the end of the novel is the search that every human being feels. Most of us human beings live trying to be what our parents want us to be. Or even worse, we try to be what we believe is what our parents want us to be, which actually maybe is not the real. And in any case, we always depend, as we were talking before, we are social animals, we always depend to be ourselves on the look of others. We are what others see of us. Juan Villoro, a great Mexican novelist, Villoro, said that in Yucatan, in a Mexican city, there is a very cruel tradition called the planters who plant. Everyone in town agrees to, for instance, make fun of somebody, and everybody in the town says, Manuel, you are so brave. You're so brave. I mean, I don't know how you do it. I admire you. And a part of being brave, Manuel, you're so good looking. You look like an athlete. And your muscles are iron muscles, and you look fantastic. Manuel, you are so, so brave and so athletic that you are the only person in town that can dive head down to the cenote pool. And Manuel does it. He could get killed in trying. Why? Because they have planted a personality in this poor guy. And this reflects who we are, because who we are depends on the look of others. It depends on the eye of the beholder. So we have to be very careful who we choose as friends, because the effect of the look of the other, of the beholder, watch out. We have to be very careful on who we choose. But the topic of identity is essential in this book, The History of the Transparent King. I wanted to ask you something else, Rosa. Yes, identity, the resistance to submission, which is so important in your work. I want to talk about your education, Rosa, your intellectual education as a writer. You always repeat this phrase. If you remember the 70s, you were not there. That's something that you repeat, and it's so funny. And you comment about the 70s, about that moment in life. And at that time, and it has to do with what you're saying, at that time, it was really difficult to be taken seriously if you were a woman. And we had to look not feminine. We had to imitate little men. And before the pill, that was the case. I mean, we had to discard once and for all the risk of getting pregnant. We lived and fucked as little men. And it was a very intense decade. Democratic transition that starts with Franco's death, that we celebrate 50 years of his death now, and even and the danger of being lucid, of being sane when Barbara comes out. There is a threat, a bomb threat of extreme right-wing parties. And in a different moment in the book, you say that youth belonged to a social class, and you talk about this debate in university when you talk about this book, because it seems that this was a very important moment in Spain when you started writing, and you talk about this in The Danger of Being Sane. Well, yes, and actually I was born under the dictatorship in Spain. When I was very young, I lived under the dictatorship still, and when Franco died, I was 24. But I was lucky enough to live the last years of Franco, which is Franco's pre-death. I have an elder brother, 5 years elder, and in those 5 years, things changed so much, you can't imagine, because the dictatorship started to crumble down, and even though the dictatorship executed people and it was very harsh, it is also true that I had time to live the age. I had to live certain things that young people in the rest of the world lived. I did it in hiding, but I did it. I lived my youth years. In the rest of the world, you bought the pill in the drugstore, but we had two Spains. We had the official Spain, and we also had the Spain of the dictatorship. But in the last years of the dictatorship, we had two Spains. The dictatorship Spain and the real Spain. So you could buy the pill in the black market. You could buy the hidden books in the black market in bookstores. So we had two Spains. And my brother didn't live this. I lived it with 5 years of difference because he was 5 years older than me. But it was very difficult, black and white. I remember the dictatorship in black and white. I mean, dictatorships, what can I say? I mean, it's horrifying. They treat you as if you were stupid, as if you were not able to decide anything about your personal life, if they had to tell you what to do at all times. And then we had the transition towards democracy. It was very interesting, but it was very scary. We were scared all the time, terrifying times. The terrorist group ETA killed 300 people in their attack, in their I don't know how many a year, I don't know. They killed one person every 3 years, the ETA terrorist group. I mean, it was terrible, the terrorist attacks. And I mean, we had coup d'etats, and every single week we had the news, and they published lists of the extreme right-wing party of people the extreme right would execute when they would take power. I was in all of those lists, and I was a piece of shit. I was nobody. I was just a girl, a young journalist. We were all in those lists. I mean, you just went out to the street and you would be on the list. Every single day we would be published in these lists. Bomb threats in the radio, newspapers. At the newspaper El País, we would spend the day outside of the building because of the bomb threats. And one day that they never told anything, a bomb went off, and one boy, an 18-year-old boy that worked in the newspaper, was killed, and 2 were severely handicapped. You went out to demonstrate, they would kill you. The extreme right would kill you out of nothing, a shotgun or beating on yourself, or the police officers beating on you. It was a horrible world. It was a horrible world. We were very, very poor in Spain. EU funds have done a lot for the development of Spain. They invested in Spain. So I remember that throughout this time, my youth, my teen years, my transition in the coup d'etat in 1881, those threats. And I thought, Why wasn't I born in Switzerland? I would have loved to get bored. Why have to live such intense lives, such level of intensity all the time? I would have loved to be born in Switzerland. But then, on the other hand, yes, of course, very interesting. I had the feeling that everything, and it's true, everything depended on what you did. The press was important. We journalists were important. And you risked your life. We risked our lives, everyone. We risked our lives because we realized that we had to build a new Spain, a new society. This was thrilling.
I was saying that when people were hippies, and I was supposed to be one of the 3 or 4 hippies that there were in Spain, and I wanted to have nicknames of other people, right? But we were hippies, and amongst other things, well, I got the idea of dedicating myself to living on the road.
I had to live my lives traveling around the world like a hippie. 2 friends of mine, a girl and a boy, they ended up killed using a lot of drug, terrible, a lot of drug. And I could have followed the same path, maybe leave Spain. If I had left, maybe I would be a waiter in Canberra. Who knows? But I would be a waiter that writes books. I can assure you that. That's it. Well, living is complicated, isn't it? It's difficult to live. It's complicated. And then I went to university. I studied psychology for years at a university that was terrible. The last years of the dictatorship, it was like a war zone. I mean, the police go in the university, raids. They would go after us on horseback on campus. I didn't learn anything in university, to be honest. I dropped out after 4 years, and then I studied journalism. 2 things. In journalism, all the worst. I learned to play cards, but I didn't learn anything. I thank the university for that. But I feel orphan. I had no teachers. I had no professors. I feel orphan. I'm a self-made woman, and I feel sorry for that, because to be a self-made woman, it is a disaster, a bloody disaster, because I have a network of knowledge that has a lot of holes. As all self-made persons, I can know a lot about one thing that nobody knows about, but of something essential, I know nothing. Typical of a self-made woman, because that's what a teacher does. They give you a roadmap. I have no roadmap, and that's disgusting.
Give a map, and something that truly I miss is the fact that I didn't have professors and teachers. We're reaching the end now, and I would like for you to talk about something in the crazed woman in the house. You talk about metaphor. One of the metaphors that you write in your childhood, you say that the writer should be the child that shouts, "The king wears no pants." When the crowd is passing by, writers not only they want to be part of the royal parade, the royal procession. It's a great observation. We spend our lives looking our point of balance and equilibrium with power. We don't want to be slaves, don't want to be tyrants either. Neither slaves nor tyrants. So, what is this point of equilibrium that we pursue, at least try to pursue, right? Yes, okay, great. It's extremely difficult not to be a tyrant. I can't be a slave or tyrant. I don't want to be crushed by power, but there's no reason for you to become the person with power. To not be a victim, to not feel like a victim, but at the same time, you don't want to, you have to complain. if you've suffered some kind of victimization. For women, one thing is that a lot of us have experienced. I lived at a time which was extremely male chauvinist. In my childhood, there was colossal, huge chauvinism, male chauvinism. Just to give you an idea, even up to the month of May in 1975, Franco died in November 1975 until May 1975. Married woman could not have a bank account without authorization from the husband, to have a passport that could not work without the husband's authorization. If she worked, the husband could go to receive and collect her wages. These laws create an entire generation of women against. They had aversion to marriage, but it was a generation. It was a kind of society where it's very uncomfortable. The role, we were victimized in a lot of things, but you don't have the role, be in the role of the victim. It's necessary to find the exact point of equilibrium where, because if you take the role of victim, it's as if you're condemned to that, but at the same time you need to complain and cry out. We go back to the story of the king is naked. The king wears no trousers. To find the place in life, it's essential, because you can die with ever finding that point of equilibrium, and power is essential. It's essential in my books. All of us are interconnected because of issues of power amongst siblings, families, in the couples, etc., and in the families, with the governments, etc. In other words, to find this point, you need power to exercise power, the power that you have, because you will always have a kind of power over somebody, some kind of power. People who deny the exercise of power, when they detain power, this is very bad. In other words, the older I get, the more complicated it gets for me. Rosa Montero, thank you very much. Thank you very much. You're great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, dear friends from Paraty. Thank you very much. It's beautiful, beautiful. You've done very well, as always.